So a man has been jailed for the manslaughter of Sean McCarthy in a case that brings up a lot of the perils of the drugs trade. And you can see both of these men are caught up with it on a low level and have really suffered as a result. But tell us about Dean Caffrey, the man convicted, what we know about him.
Yeah, so Dean Caffrey was found guilty. He was acquitted of the murder of Sean McCarthy, who's a 28-year-old man. So this happened in August 2022, and then a jury in earlier this year found him not guilty of the murder, but by a majority verdict, I think 10-2, found him guilty of manslaughter, so of unlawfully killing Sean McCarthy. And essentially what happened was the court had heard how Dean Caffrey had an issue with drugs, had been involved with drug dealers, and basically had worked up a debt. And he told Gardaí that Sean McCarthy told him that if he held certain things in his apartment, some drugs, a gun, that this would pay his debt. And then he claimed that on this day, Sean McCarthy arrived at his apartment, was very agitated, had a gun, and basically said, "I want $5,000 from you." He claimed that a struggle ensued. At one point, Sean McCarthy got distracted and that he was basically shot in the head, and then he panicked, and then there was a cover-up after. So Sean McCarthy was missing for 5 days. So eventually, we can go into that now in a while, but eventually Dean Caffrey did go to the guards, and the incident, what happened, came out, and he was sentenced. So the reason it's back in the news that he is being sentenced to 8 years in jail. He got 9 years with 1 suspended.
Yeah, so all of that is of course based on the testimony given by Dean Caffrey. I mean, he's given his version of events.
Yeah.
Clearly Sean McCarthy isn't there to give his side, being dead. But what we do know bits about Sean McCarthy. I mean, in court he's described as being involved in the drugs trade, and I don't think there's any particular dispute in that way.
No.
But what we did know about him at the time was that he was at a very low level involved in the drugs trade, and certainly when he was at the time he was killed. We were being told how he'd also come under threats over drug debts from much more sinister characters. He was described as kind of being, an easy touch, a sort of a cheerful sort of guy who wasn't a sort of hard man, and he'd been sucked into this world. And of course, me and Nicola did a couple of podcasts about this drug-related intimidation. Yeah. And this underlies this whole case from all sides, that there are these sums of money going around. There's people leading very chaotic lives, and it's just being routinely enforced with threats of violence and extreme violence.
Because as what would have been reported around the time of his body being discovered, was that as you said, Sean McCarthy, he was kind of considered low to mid-level in the drugs trade in Ballymun. He had an address in Poppintree, but he was said to have been involved in crack cocaine dealing. But that, as you say there, every person owes something to somebody involved in that world. So while he was putting pressure on, people who owed him debts, he was also under pressure from people above him. So from more senior members of in the drug dealing in that area, he would have been answering to them. And obviously, it all kind of, there's a cycle to these things, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, the crack cocaine issue in Ballymun, like in a number of areas, not focusing in on Ballymun, but it did have a particular issue with it. There was a number of homes being taken over, like cuckooed as they're called, where people who owe money, and in order to allow them to pay their debt, basically their home gets taken over and is used as a base then for drug dealing. And we had around maybe that time or a couple of years before, there was a kind of a low-level war went on where there was a lot of shootings, non-fatal mostly, a lot of attacks, a lot of very young people involved in drugs, all centred around this crack cocaine trade in Ballymun. Very dangerous incidents. So I suppose Sean McCarthy gets found dead, and to some extent the reports come out that he's involved in drugs. And I suppose the public, do their sympathy, does does it get there? I don't know sometimes with these cases. But I think when we heard his aunt speak on the steps outside court, it brings home another sort of dimension to this story, and you really felt for her. What did she have to say?
You do feel for her. So essentially, after Dean Caffrey was jailed for 8 years, the family came out and, very dignified. They had a photo of Sean McCarthy in their hands while they spoke. And, this was played on RTE News. But basically, she said that Dean Caffrey's actions were self-serving and that he tried to avoid detection. Sorry, that's what the judge said, but she basically said that they were not happy with the sentence, that they were hoping that the DPP would appeal, that their relative's body was desecrated because essentially he was missing for 5 days. So what happened was after Sean McCarthy was killed, Dean Caffrey wrapped his body in plastic, held it in place with a bungee cord, and then took money from the dead man's pockets, went and bought cocaine. Then he went to Dunn's and bought a suitcase, but Sean McCarthy's body would not completely fit in it, so he partially put it in a suitcase into a wardrobe, wrapped in the plastic, and then basically went about his business. The victim's family were trying to approach him because they knew each other, to say, do you know where he is? He wouldn't get into the victim's father's car to talk to him about it. So all this went on for days. It was said in court how, he was seen fine, he was with his then girlfriend, all of these things. So I suppose that would have went against him in the sentencing, and the family do reference that, basically how his body was desecrated. They were put through hell for those 5 days. They did not know where he was. And then they basically said, that they're not happy. A direct quote is that from Lisa McCarthy, she is Sean's aunt, and she said, "We are totally disappointed and disgusted with the outcome today, especially in light of the brutal and inhumane desecration of Sean's body and the calculated delay in the body being returned to the family for burial." And they described it as a horrendous crime, and they basically said the sentence did not reflect the gravity of what was done to their loved one.
And there's more details on the full court report from Owen Reynolds. It's on SundayWorld.com if people want to read it. But Owen reports how the judge, in summing up, says that Caffrey was involved with drug dealers from whom he bought drugs. And he says, the quote said, his drug abuse led to that death and his involvement in that subculture. It's not a case of the accidental discharge of a firearm in a domestic setting or a hunting accident. So he's, I suppose, saying that while a struggle may occur, and we have, of course, seen cases, other cases in very high-profile incidents where, obviously Caffrey is in his own home when this occurs, and if there is a constitutional right to, I suppose, defend your home, but he's making a distinction here that he was involved in the drugs trade, and this is how it's brought about. And obviously, then even probably more harrowingly, it's there is details about how he may have, even if something had occurred, that he may have remained alive for a period of time, Sean McCarthy, and no help was sought.
Yeah, exactly. And then he ordered a storage unit as well online. So, these things went against him because essentially he had tried to claim it was a case of self-defense, really, in his original trial, and that was obviously thrown out by the jury. But the judge had kind of said, fair enough, you're saying that you were under pressure, you were under debt, you're in a lockup in prison because you're under threat. But he said, all of these things are basically, you entered into that world of drugs and you did not go to the guards. He only went to the guards really when it was Sean McCarthy's family were really trying to find him, and then I think he couldn't take it anymore, and he told his family about it, and then they went to the guards with him.
Yeah, so I mean, underlying it, obviously, the case that's made is that, or Caffrey's claims are that it was money that he was accused of taking some heroin, or he was storing heroin. Obviously, we spoke about crack cocaine, but there's not really a distinct, these things are drug dealing, really, that all drugs are, you don't specialise at that level. And certainly there was a lot of street dealing going on in parts of Ballymun at the time. So I suppose, but even still, you're talking about €5,000, which is a large amount of money. But it's not a huge amount of money. But I suppose what it does show is how violence somebody can lose their life over, which is a modest sort of sum of money.
It is. And I suppose it goes back to what you were saying earlier about this cycle of drug deaths, and generally the people that are benefiting are those that aren't actually, they're so far at the top that they're not really involved in this. Because I think what happened was originally it was a smaller debt and he was holding these drugs, and then he claims that Sean McCarthy turned up one night agitated and wanting $5,000, and I suppose you would assume then that did he want to owe this? Did he want to get this $5,000 to give to people he owed money to? So it's this kind of chain where the people in the middle of it are the ones that are suffering really, and it's those dealers at the top. The people in the middle of it with addictions or under threat, or then the families who are suffering these horrendous situations as well. So that was kind of suggested that maybe the $5,000 was that what he was looking for.
Well, I think there is a good belief that he had come under threat himself over the years. It's a grim tale, I suppose, for everybody involved. But to hear Roseanne speak in so to articulate that on the courts, it really brought it up.
It was, yeah. And I suppose we have to say as well, so the sentencing happened yesterday, but there was an original sentencing hearing in which victim impact statements were given a few weeks ago. And Sean McCarthy's sister also, her statement was quite moving, and she basically talked about, they talked about, how his body was treated after he died, how, they had that horrendous period of not knowing where he was. But also she said that the suitcase, basically she likened it to him wanting to use that to dispose of him, and basically she was horrified at the thought of, was this going to be his coffin? Was this what was intended for her brother? So the family, people, as you said, people might, when they hear somebody involved in drug dealing has been killed, maybe it is a societal thing where there isn't as much sympathy as a young mother or something. But you always have to remember, at the end of the day, these people have complicated lives, and there's always innocent families there. And you can just imagine what they had to go through, and then having to speak outside court in front of cameras to...
And of course, he doesn't get to give his own perspective on what happened on that night. There's only two people who were in that room who know exactly what was happening.
Yeah.
And so you and that's always difficult for the families as well. Like, the killer has given a statement, he's given a version of events, but that can't really be challenged except by a man that's not there to challenge it.
Yeah, and then you sort of question then, obviously this person's killed someone, so can you take it all for the honest truth? Because he also disposed of the gun as well.
Yeah.
And the gun was found in the Talca River eventually by guards. So, these things, of course, if you were a family member and somebody had done this to your loved one, you would be thinking, is this actually what happened?
Yeah.
Well, and there's a I suppose a horrible sense of, maybe, I don't know what the word is, of not getting full closure, because as you said, you're relying on somebody who's done this horrific act to your loved one.
And because he's given his statement and it's on the record, that is the version of events that gets repeated. And, undoubtedly it was accepted by a jury that this is a case of manslaughter, that it wasn't it didn't reach the bar to be a conviction for murder, which would have, maybe involved more intent or more planning.
Yeah.
So you accept the verdict of the jury.
No, and I suppose will remain to be seen if the DPP does. The family have said that they want the DPP to look at the sentence. I suppose 8 years with remission and everything like that, the standard remission, he probably would be out. I don't know if he was in custody already. So, you are probably talking roughly 5-6 years for taking someone's life. So I suppose it remains to be seen if anything will be challenged there. But again, you can understand the sort of the plight that the family must feel in relation to that as well.
Well, unfortunately, it won't be the last drug-related intimidation story we cover, no doubt, in the next few months. So thanks very much, Eimear.
Thanks, Niall.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.